Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another forecast discussion. There's a little bit of an echo in the room I'm in right now, so apologies if the audio is a little bit wonky. But today definitely is worthy of a forecast discussion. We've got a moderate risk out for parts of northern and western Minnesota into eastern South Dakota, surrounded by a big ol' enhanced risk that surrounds that moderate risk and then goes down the dry line a little bit into eastern Kansas. Tornado is going to be a particularly interesting threat for today. 15% hatched area up in that moderate risk area. Also a separate area, 10% down along the dry line there. Damaging winds, I think, going to be the most significant threat, especially up in the moderate risk area today. 45% hatched area is pretty significant for a wind threat here from the SPC. And then large hail is going to be a threat as well, especially in the early hours of the convective life cycle. So kind of two different targets today. You got one kind of up on the triple point surface low up there in kind of the moderate risk area. And then you have the second one there down along the dry line that extends into Iowa and Kansas. So we're going to go into both targets today, tell you the merits, the pros and cons of both from a kind of a storm chasing and weather perspective, of course. And so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start off, as we usually do, with our water vapor satellite imagery. And you can see this big old trough that's been entrenched across the western half of the U.S. for the past couple of days now. You can see that southwesterly flow in the exit region of this trough. And you can see a big old storm complex here that is raging across Minnesota, northern Iowa. This is a pretty potent MCS that has made its way last night from Nebraska. We had some supercells fire up in central Nebraska last night, particularly one discrete supercell there that produced very large hail. And then a line of storms that moved in from western Nebraska. That has all moved off. We just had a severe thunderstorm watch that expired, and we're still dealing with some storms today, this morning, about 8:30 a.m. Central Daylight Time right now as I'm recording this video. Moving up into southern Minnesota, western Iowa, from kind of the eastern Nebraska region. So we're going to be dealing with these through the morning, but I expect these to move out pretty quickly. Given the strength of the kinematics, the strength of this trough, I believe these will move out pretty quickly, and we should get very rapid recovery of the air mass behind these early day storms. So recovery of the atmosphere not going to be a super big issue today, like it was yesterday for parts of northeast Nebraska. With that cirrus deck that was hanging around. Here's our visible satellite imagery, and you can see the entirety of the cloud cover that's kind of across the region. We've got this complex of storms into Minnesota and eastern Iowa, or western Iowa, excuse me. We do have some patches of clearing already into southeast South Dakota and to parts of eastern Nebraska. Again, shouldn't be an issue today, given just the strength of this trough and the very strong meridional flow that's going to push all this debris off toward the north, get it out of this region very quickly this morning. I do expect we will get pretty rapid recovery behind these early day storms. And let me show you what I'm talking about. This is the 500 millibar map on SPC mesoanalysis, so about 18,000 feet above the surface. Big old trough here, big old long wave trough here across basically the entire western half of the U.S. Definitely has some closed contours in there, but overall a very strong trough. And if you recall yesterday, this was definitely a positively tilted trough. It was still trying to mature. Most of the strong flow is on the backside of the trough, and that's not the case today. You can see the belt of most enhanced flow is now rounded the base of that trough. So this trough is definitely maturing. You can see it's definitely now taken on a negative tilt. So this is a mature trough that should continue to move off toward the east a little bit today and take on a little bit more of a negative tilt as we go throughout the day. Some decent defluence aloft. You can see kind of those wind barbs, those height contours spreading apart a little bit here in the exit region of this trough, and that's going to help enhance the rising motion and the lift here across the target areas for today. So big old trough here. We've got a number of short waves rotating around this large scale trough. You can see this is at 700 millibars here. We've got one up into central Minnesota that may have impacted this area of storms here throughout the overnight and into the morning hours. We've got one back in here across western Nebraska, western Kansas, western Oklahoma. That should be our main player today, I would suspect. It's going to rotate pretty quickly off toward the northeast and probably be somewhere in here by the early afternoon hours. So that should help really initiate storms, reignite storms there early this afternoon across that area. So Nice, very well-defined shortwave there at 700 millibars. We go down to 850 millibars, you can see a pretty monster low-level jet here, all the way up from the Great Lakes region down through the entirety of the southern plains. 50, 60 plus knots here, especially across the central plains, Kansas, into Iowa there. So very potent low-level jet, and that should maintain itself throughout the day. We got this big, broad cyclonic circulation here at 850 millibars, and so that's going to likely remain in place today, given the strength of the southwesterly flow that has traversed the Rockies. We should continue to keep that in place. And if we look at our surface map throughout the day, at least this morning, we've got, again, this kind of very broad sort of surface low, very broad, large cyclonic circulation with multiple centers here. We've got this center up here, kind of in the South Dakota, North Dakota border region, then this center down here into the kind of Kansas-Nebraska border region. And this southern one is going to be our main player for today. That is going to deepen and kind of ride the baroclinic zone. Again, yesterday we had this kind of cold front sort of dry line feature that's still in place today, and this low is going to ride that front and deepen as we go through the afternoon today. So as we get that to deepen, and we'll go just to give you a sneak peek here, you can see how those height contours really start to, or those pressure contours, the isobars, really start to centralize there in that southern sort of low center as it moves off toward the north. And that should be the main sort of target that's kind of going to fuel that moderate risk area up there. Storm's going to fire near that surface low today. So you can see already at 6 hours from now, 988 millibar low. That is a very, very strong low there. So very deep surface low there for today's activity. That's why we're seeing such a potent potential for severe weather. So let's go ahead and look at our surface map here. We've got broad southerly flow across the entire region here. Very strong flow, given we have a pretty strong surface low already. 994 millibars, I believe it was analyzed on the SPC mesoanalysis. Yep, 994 there. So pretty strong surface flow already, helping to maintain these very strong southerly winds here across the region. We've got, as far as moisture goes, low 60s dew points residing into southern Minnesota, down into Iowa a little bit better. Going to cross out these stations here. These dew points for the last several weeks have been erroneous, very much higher than the surrounding sites. But I think across Iowa, mid-60s dew points is the main sort of moisture pattern we're seeing there. Down into Missouri, much the same. Into Kansas, much the same as well. So pretty, I guess, homogeneous, if you will, sort of moisture at the surface here across the entirety of the region. If we go back out to the west a little bit, you can see where our surface lows are. You can see that wind shift there. We've got kind of this kind of center here. You can see a little bit chaotic here given the overnight convection, but maybe one low center in there, and this wind shift here across the central and southern plains. So very much, yesterday we had kind of a chaotic, sort of more nebulous surface pattern. Today that is definitely not the case. Very strong indication of what the surface features are going to be throughout the day today. Let's take a look at some soundings. SPC sounding page was having a little bit of difficulty, so I'm using the College of DuPage soundings from this morning. So this is going to be our Omaha sounding for this morning. And this is a pretty impressive sounding. You can see it's kind of got that loaded gun profile. Lots of instability aloft already, decent CAPE already in the profile, over about 1,500 joules per kilogram of CAPE already in the profile. Very stout cap here in the low to mid levels there, very decent warm nose there from that elevated mix layer. That should help keep storm coverage at bay throughout the day today. And the SPC was mentioning an outflow boundary across kind of that northeast Nebraska area. And you can see that's kind of definitely, you can see that wind shift right in there. You can see that wind shift, easterly winds to the north of that, southerly winds to the south of that. That should retreat north given the strong southerly flow today. And that may help overcome that capping inversion fairly early on. There's pretty strong convergence along this boundary. So that may overcome this capping inversion fairly early on. So I expect storms today to fire fairly early in the afternoon, given all the forcing that is in play and all these kind of mesoscale features specifically that outflow boundary at the surface. Despite this kind of strong cap here, you can see the SIN is about 200 joules per kilogram there. So definitely something that can be overcome by given this very strong kinematics aloft and some of those boundaries at the surface. Steep blast rates aloft, so large hail should be a concern for at least the early portion of the convective life cycle. We're going to talk about storm mode here in a second, but a very loaded gun looking sounding there for Omaha this morning. We'll take a look here at Aberdeen, South Dakota. This may be a little bit contaminated by morning convection. Actually not so bad. So we've got, again, kind of that loaded gun look. A little bit of an inverted V profile here. Actually, this is the 0Z from yesterday. So it looks like they did not release a sounding up there this morning. So this is the Minneapolis-St. Paul sounding. And this has definitely been influenced by convection this morning. You can see just a very saturated profile in the upper levels, indicative of clouds there. So we'll kind of throw out that sounding. Unfortunately, we don't have better coverage of soundings in there today. I believe the Taurus Field Project will be out and giving us some soundings throughout the day, and I believe these offices will be launching soundings throughout the afternoon today to give us a better picture of how this environment has evolved throughout the day. You can see it in the low levels, nice turning, so strong warm advection here, strong veering of the winds in the lowest levels of the profile, so large low-level shear at this point. You can see helicity at 624 right now, so very strong low-level shear, low and kind of low to mid-level shear there. So large warm advection ongoing and very strong profiles, at least for tornadic activity later this afternoon. But again, storm mode going to be an issue. The 12Z NAM I don't believe is out quite yet, so we will take a look. It is just coming out as we speak. So we're going to use the 9Z wrap, and we may come back to the 12Z NAM here in a little bit just to kind of get a multi-model look at this event. But this is the 9Z wrap model. So you can see with that trough, and you can see that kind of shortwave embedded in that trough right in here, rotating around the base of that trough, the main kind of long wave trough, and impinging into the region fairly early on in the afternoon. You can see just beautiful defluence aloft here at 500 millibars. These height contours really spreading apart here as you go throughout the early afternoon into the mid-afternoon hours. So very strong defluence aloft, allowing for impressive lift and rising motion here in the warm sector for a lot of storms. So that is going to be a positive because we have plenty of lift, plenty of defluence for storms. But there may be quite a bit of that lift given the strong kinematics aloft here. So storm mode may become an issue later on. We'll go down to 700 millibars here. You can see just these kinks in the flow rotating around, just a very well-defined shortwave there, kinks in these height contours here. So this is at 19Z, this is at 2 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And we're seeing that kind of already impinge into the kind of that northern target area, that moderate risk area, by about 2 p.m. So I would expect storms to fire about 1 to 2 p.m. across parts of, say, far northeast Nebraska, eastern and southeastern South Dakota into southern Minnesota, maybe northeast Iowa there. And then they should become more numerous fairly quickly throughout the afternoon. We're going to be behind the shortwave there for this dry line portion of the storms. The shear kind of decreases with southern extent there as the flow in the mid-levels kind of decreases with southern extent. But up here in Iowa, maybe a little bit better, a little bit closer to that shortwave, a little bit better flow in the mid-levels. A little bit stronger shear for discrete supercells perhaps, given a little bit more southwesterly flow with southern extent. You can see the trough here, a little bit more southwesterly flow here aloft, whereas up here in the moderate risk area, very meridional or south to north flow with northern extent. So that'll be something to keep in mind. Low-level jet here going to remain strong throughout the day. You can see that plume of low-level jet remains strong given that very strong low-level circulation there, especially up with northern extent. This is at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time, very strong low-level jet out of the south. This is very, very, very favorable look for tornadic supercells. Tornadic events often feature this kind of low-level jet. Very strong 50 to 60 knot low-level jet out of the south. So very favorable look here across that the moderate risk area this afternoon. And the low-level jet does extend down along the dry line, increase along the dry line there with southern extent with time this evening. Surface map here on the wrap. So you can see that secondary low center to the south really ramps up as we go throughout the day today. This is going to be at 2 p.m. You can see 992 millibar low, 990 millibar low there. Just this is a very classic look for a severe weather outbreaks. Likely going to favor storm initiation along that low initially, along that kind of retreating outflow boundary, and right along that surface low. Very, very impressive look here on the surface map. As we go with time, that low deepens even more, and we should get even more storm coverage, more chance for that low-level shear to increase, kind of along that warm frontal zone there in kind of south-central Minnesota. Should be the favored area for tornadoes. Perhaps going to be mostly embedded in a line there, but still nonetheless a little bit farther south down along the dry line going to be favorable for tornadoes as well. Right ahead of that kind of that pseudo cold front kind of dry line feature there. So let's take a look at the dew points here, see how they progress, and take a look at some soundings for today. So we'll go our Central Plains sector here. So you can see just that very classic look of the moisture really wrapping back into that surface low. Low will be somewhere out in here, that moisture wrapping around into the surface low. So I would expect early on in the afternoon, given the proximity of that shortwave here, by about 1 to 2 p.m. we should get storm formation right along this kind of arc here up near that surface low, kind of an arc of supercells along this surface low. And again, I think convective coverage will, just given the strong forcing aloft, will rapidly increase here. And we may get some messier storm modes here. Maybe down here with southern extent, maybe a little bit better chance for discrete storms. And let's take a look at the shear vector orientation with respect to the initiating boundary. So here is our kind of cold front / dry line here. So with northern extent, we do have that kind of meridional flow. These shear vectors are very much parallel to the boundary. They definitely have a very solid, solid perpendicularity to the boundary up in kind of this region. So actually with northern extent, we may see a little bit better chance for discrete storms, maybe a little bit longer window, although the forcing may overcome that favorable shear vector orientation. There's just so much kinematic, so much kinematic energy aloft that may just itself fire numerous storms, even though there may be these shear vectors that are perpendicular to the boundary. With southern extent, actually a little bit worse shear vector orientation with respect to the boundary, a little more parallel down here, but the forcing may be a little bit less down along the dry line from Iowa down into eastern Kansas. The forcing overall may be a little bit less. So that may kind of balance itself down here as well. You may get a little bit lesser storm coverage down here despite the kind of parallel nature of the shear vectors to the initiating boundary. So very interesting setup. Stronger forcing aloft, stronger forcing up here in the northern target, better shear vector orientation may kind of counterbalance. I think we'll get a window for discrete storms, maybe 1 to 2 hours before they congeal into a line. And given the strong kinematics aloft, I think tornadoes are going to definitely be in play even after the storm mode gets a little bit messier. So this is going to be at 20Z. We'll take soundings from here. May struggle to get uncontaminated soundings here. Okay, so we got an uncontaminated sounding here. Strong instability, low-level CAPE increasing. This is at 20Z, so 3 p.m. 73 over 68, very favorable low-level, very deep moisture in the low levels there. Strong instability already. Low-level shear definitely there. You can see the hodograph is just off the map here. So these storm motions today are going to be very, very quick off toward the north or northeast. You can see the bunker's right storm motion, 200 degrees at 60 knots. So very fast storm motions today. Definitely chasers today need to stay, downstream of these storms and kind of let them come to them instead of kind of being up there up underneath the base the entire time. Down here along the dry line, not sure if storms will fire this early. We may see a little bit later storm initiation down along the dry line, given the lesser forcing down there. But we'll take a sounding here at 20Z. Down south along the dry line, hodographs not nearly as favorable for tornadic storms up there. Definitely large instability, though, over 2,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE. So the parameters are there for storms along the dry line to be fairly severe. And then you can see that low really deepens, really draws that moisture back in by this evening. 23Z will go. This is at 6 p.m. We'll take soundings just ahead of that surface low. Then we'll take some down here, down into southern Minnesota, kind of the Iowa border there. A little bit kind of in between both targets there. Then one maybe down into Kansas along the dry line. So up here, just kind of crazy looking photographs there. Just off the charts, upper level winds, very strong meridional flow there, taking these storms quickly off toward the north. And then as we go into the afternoon hours, down kind of the same thing there into southern Minnesota. Lesser low-level shear with southern extent down into Kansas. Definitely strong instability though, so we'll need to watch for a tornado threat down there. Large hail as well, given the storm mode may be a little bit more discreet. But again, I think damaging winds, large hail, at least in the early portion of the convective life cycle, and some tornadoes. This is kind of your classic sort of bullet sounding, as I call it. These storms that just race off toward the north or northeast. Common in the mid-Atlantic region. Just very strong meridional flow aloft, going to allow these storms to race off toward the north. We'll take finally a look at some CAM data here. We'll start with the northern target. And this is the 12Z HRRR. Take this with a grain of salt, of course. This is just one guess at what the radar might look like. So as we go through the early afternoon hours, we get storm formation pretty quickly, pretty rapidly right at that surface low. And it gets messy pretty quickly. You can see some discrete structures in here with this early activity. And then we get some more activity down to the south there in kind of southwest Minnesota. This activity would be interesting for sure. Definitely a little bit more discreet maybe down in here to the south of this kind of messy activity right along the surface low. So that's something to watch there if this HRRR run does come to fruition. We'll go down a little bit farther south now, see the dry line target, and you can see that storms do fire down into Kansas particularly at about 0Z, so about 7 p.m. Down there would favor all severe hazards, mostly a large hail and damaging wind threat, but definitely a chance for tornadoes as well. But I think the greater tornado threat is going to be up into, as storms can form into northern Iowa, in that kind of the northern portion of that 10% area there, and then in that moderate risk area. I think the chance for tornadoes is going to be fairly high, even if storm mode is messy. It's not really going to matter given this very strong shear in the atmosphere, very strong kinematics aloft. There are going to be tornadoes in this activity. They will be embedded, very kind of a messy storm mode here, just given the overall amount of forcing. But we do have a few kind of more discrete sort of updrafts within this line. So these would have the potential to produce tornadoes, perhaps some strong. We'll take a sounding here just to the east of this activity. Yeah, and very, very large looping photographs here, very strong shear aloft, would favor strong tornadoes with any activity here in this cluster that can remain discrete. Strong long track tornadoes definitely a possibility today, especially in these storms. If these do come to fruition down here farther south, much more discrete down here, would have a strong tornado threat, as well as a large hail threat as long as they stay discrete. And then more so a damaging wind threat as the convective coverage increases throughout the late afternoon, early evening hours into central Minnesota into the evening. So that'll wrap things up this morning. Again, a moderate risk out for eastern South Dakota, far southeast North Dakota into much of western Minnesota. Then that enhanced risk surrounds that and then goes down along the dry line a little bit. Tornado threat is definitely there today, including the potential for some strong long track tornadoes, particularly up in that moderate risk area and surrounding areas. Damaging winds going to be a big threat as well, given the overall likely quick transition to linear mode, and then a large hail threat in the early convective life cycle, particularly with storms down here along the dry line that are going to be more discrete given lesser forcing down there. So that's all we have for now. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.